Today we are discussing comprehensivism, okay? But we're going to do it in a different way. I have a new discussion format where I'm trying to look at topics comprehensively using all our faculties, okay? I'm trying to do that. So we're going to be discussing comprehensivism today in 8 different stages. Okay, Joe, you can start the timer. Okay, we're going to be discussing comprehensivism in 8 different stages. This is stage 1, which is focusing on the topic. So we're discussing nothing but comprehensivism. We're going to be looking at every aspect of comprehensivism, but we'll be talking about comprehensivism. Motivation. This is something that we have been doing anyway. This is something that is close to our hearts. This is something which we have spent enormous time on. Today is the time to rise in the level of our understanding by explicating this point in many different ways and hearing other people express it in many different ways, okay? So the focus, the first stage is choosing a focus. The focus is comprehensivism, okay? The second stage is about defining it, so seeing its nature. Okay, what is comprehensivism? So the first question on the table, I'm going to unfurl these 8 stages, stage by stage. So the first stage is to choose a focus, which is very quick. So put all your attention on this one topic of comprehensivism. Whenever you're talking, whenever you're doing something, just keep coming back to this. Okay, that's it. The second stage is to define what it is, to say, what is it? That's it. So the second stage is going to be the question of what is it? Okay, so the question on the table for this stage, we are on stage 2 now, is to answer the question, what is comprehensivism to you? As best as you understand comprehensivism, what is it? So please go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to talk about what is comprehensivism. Okay, we'll have many different opportunities to explore many angles of it. But right now, the only question on the table is, what is it? What is comprehensivism? So go ahead and type an exclamation mark. This is going to be highly interactive. At each of the stages, I'm going to invite you to contribute. I'll give you a little bit of preview of the next stage so you can know that is coming. In the next stage, we're going to be talking about our own approach to comprehensivism. Okay, that's going to be much more elaborate. So you'll have plenty of opportunity of talking about that question, about how you approach comprehensivism, your experience. How do you approach comprehensivism? How do you exercise that in the third stage? But in this stage, stage 2, only question you're trying to answer is, what is comprehensivism? So please go ahead, and I would really appreciate it if many people contributed at each of the stages, because everybody will get a lot more value from this meetup if you do. So we're going to start with Joe, Mike, and Evanique. Joe, what is comprehensivism?
So comprehensivism is, I see it as the answer to specialization. It's the exact opposite of specialization and being too narrow about something. We've talked a lot about design thinking here. And as Buckminster Fuller talks about it, is in terms of being a design scientist that looks at the whole world, looks at the entire universe. So in Utopia and Oblivion, he has a paragraph that says a design scientist would not be concerned exclusively with the seat of a tractor, but with the whole concept of production and distribution of food, which might possibly lead to the developing a whole new industry of hydroponic factories for automated growing, canning, and packing of food within a large 3/4 sphere geodesic greenhouses, within which circularly operating, planting, cultivating, pruning, and harvesting mechanisms in a tree-like arrangement, and how would that initiate the total industry. Now, I only read that. That's, it's very wordy, and it's just a very small example. But what it is it's actually holistic thinking. He's looking at how it connects across a whole system. It's not just the tractor, but it's the whole process and everything and how it's interrelated to one another. So how do you then, we'll get to how you approach those and how you're able to spot those problems. But to me, it's holistic thinking so that you can actually start to put together, make connections from other industries, within industries, and outside industries. And this was something that one of your favorite people, Leonardo Da Vinci, has done so well, right? He was able to innovate in so many different areas. So the ability to have adequate breadth and depth in a number of areas and make the connections. And that's really what comprehensivism is to me, with the ultimate goal being that you're trying to solve humanity's problems.
Beautiful.
And so that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And in one of the stages, we will have opportunity of talking about what is the best concrete example that, like Leonardo da Vinci is a good example of what being a comprehensivist looks like, kind of concretize that. So we'll have an opportunity of doing that. All right, next up is Mike. Mike, what is comprehensivism?
I had never heard of the word prior to attending these meetups. So my first interest came in the area of, say, polymathy, which you can define, as the Bernsteins did, as having an interest across a wide range of disciplines, and not just a wide range of interest, but there is a certain level of depth and competency within all of those. To me, a comprehensivist is someone who has or is able to think polymathically, but with a goal in mind. They're not just using or they're not just acquiring knowledge across these disciplines, but they're actually acquiring it, looking to further their aims in the future. So they're a working polymath. That's what I define a comprehensivist to be.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Next up is going to be Evanik, Maritza, and Judy. Evanik.
Yeah, the way I define it is a study of many different topics that, just studying a whole vast of different topics and going, in depth into them and really learning about new things. So that's the way I take it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Maritza.
I view comprehensivism as the embracing of a variety of subjects and curiosities in almost in direct rejection of hyper-focus on just the one thing.
Excellent, excellent. Very good. Next up is going to be Judy. Judy, what is comprehensivism?
I had never heard of comprehensivism before, like Mike. And when I heard the subject, it just fascinated me. So I think that comprehensivism is just being fascinated with learning. It also has to do with what I call, well, I don't call it, I haven't coined that, continuous process improvement, that you never know. I mean, you're never going to know everything. And so, but you're moving in a direction of curiosity, and you're motivated and you're resilient. And so you just want to learn whatever you want to learn, not necessarily what other people tell you what you have to learn, but just what you want to do, what you want to learn, whether it's going to solve problems in humanity or whatever. To me, that's not the point at this point. It's just for me, I just don't have like a goal in comprehensivism. It's process.
Got it.
Learning,
Excellent.
motivation.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Laura, what does comprehensivism mean to you? What does it mean?
You know, in school, sometimes they say we teach like an inch deep and a mile wide. So I would say the comprehensivists are mile wide.
Wonderful. Mile wide. Excellent. Next up is going to be Brian. Brian, what is comprehensivism?
So giving due consideration to all of the perspectives involved, affected, or concerned with the question at hand.
All perspectives. Wonderful. Excellent. Next up is Joe.
So really quickly, one of the important parts of it that I actually failed to mention in my opening is it's also suspending your bias and being open to new ideas and having multiple perspectives and being able to incorporate multiple perspectives. So that's a very important part of comprehensivism.
Wonderful. Thank you. Kevin, what is comprehensivism?
Thank you, Shanka. I used to use some, if I use a verb, I would integrate and it's like accept a bias, accept another side, and it's continuous improvement, process oriented, and not just the value is present, and also see the past and predict the future.
Wonderful.
And, yes,
Go ahead.
thank
Go
you.
ahead. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay. If you adjective, I use include, inclusivity is the over the diversity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Brian Allenby. Brian.
Okay, I look at it from a purely personal point of view, so I'm not looking at how I could change the world or anything like that. To me, it's a consideration of everything in a possible area that you could be looking at and making sure you cover all angles. I use it sparingly, but for me, it's a case of looking from my own part at the moment. For example, I look at all the things that I never learned through my life, and I produce a learning plan for all of those, trying to cover each of them in a very different area, sorry, a very comprehensive area. So it's more like polymath than comprehensivism, but that's what it means to me personally.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So we've finished stage 2, and I'm going to summarize what people have said about comprehensivism. The next stage, I'm going to invite you to talk at greater length about your own take on comprehensivism, your own approach to being comprehensivist in your own life. The first question was about, the question that we just answered was about what is comprehensivism. The next question is going to be your approach to comprehensivism. Here, let's hear how each of us has, approached comprehensivism. Okay, so it's going to be more personal. It is going to be trying to hear how different, how each of us approaches comprehensivism. But before that, I want to summarize. So first stage was just setting the goal, saying we are going to focus on, we are going to concentrate on this topic of comprehensivism. It is worth doing. Second was on saying, what is comprehensivism? Getting that on paper. To quickly summarize it, it's opposite of specialization. You're looking at the entire universe. You're looking at holistic systems. You're exploring all interconnections. You're making connections constantly between fields. You have a wide range of interest, wide range of curiosity. You're thinking polymathically and always bringing this large context to bear on any one thing that you're doing. This is opposite of hyper-focus. You are exploring variety of subjects. It's a continuous process of improvement. It's being mile wide. It is looking at all perspectives. It is looking at things from multiple perspectives. It is all about being open. It is being open to correcting your biases. It is all about integration. It is all about inclusivity and taking in all the diversity, commitment to looking at everything. These are some of the things that, you know, people brought up now. In the stage 3, we are going to respectfully listen to everyone's own approach to comprehensivism. You're welcome to take between 2 to 4 minutes to talk about how you approach comprehensivism, how you pursue comprehensivism. So it is just talking about how you do it. What have you been doing? So it is about personal experience that we're going to put on the table. All right, so go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to talk about how have you approached, how do you approach comprehensivism? What is your perspective on comprehensivism? We'll start with Evanik.
So I think my approach before I learned about this term comprehensivism was, you know, participating in different types of meetups. And this was before the pandemic. What I was a part of was a group. It was called Intellectual Discussions, and we would discuss different topics. It was, you know, people who had different political views or different ideas about things, and listening and, you know, just taking it all in. And then I think, you know, participating in the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society, and, you know, again, just being open to different ideas and, you know, talking them out and, you know, asking people questions, like, you know, finding out like what is at the root of their belief, you know, taking a genuine interest in people. Because, I mean, everybody has a story, everybody has a past, and everybody has experience. So learning from that, you know, trying to really take a comprehensive approach to getting to know people. I think also participating in different learning programs, you know, watching YouTube videos of different people, different topics, and what they present on, and, you know, just expanding. And, you know, of course, 52 living ideas, you know, just kind of like participating in different topics, you know, topics that I don't know, but I have an interest in. If it piques my interest and I have the time, you do it. So I think all of these things for me has contributed to me being a comprehensive thinker. And I think the hardest part of this is like, I think it helps you figure out who you are when you're a comprehensive thinker, and trying to work that out, like, you know, listening to new ideas and, you know, accepting certain ones, and, you know, staying true to myself, whatever that is. And that is something that changes for me. You know, as you learn and you grow, of course you change. So who you are changes as you have new experiences, as you experience different people. So I think that's how I approach comprehensive learning for myself and for my own growth and development.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. The point that really stood out for me was 2 points. You know, having genuine interest in people, genuinely actually engaging other people who have very different perspectives by simply the fact that they're different people. And secondly, what it does for you, that it increases your understanding of yourself, figuring out who you are. So thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, Maritza, and Mike. Joe, what is your approach to comprehensivism?
I think the most important thing for me, as far as being a comprehensivist, is understanding what I value first, right? And kind of what I do value is having an understanding of a wide range of topics and being able to make connections between those topics. So that's the value. So then I have to figure out how best to go about that. And the way I go about that is I engage in as many meetups as I possibly can. And as many cultures as I possibly can, so that I'm actually starting to get exposed to different ways of thinking. And then you start to be able to integrate. You know, the one example would be like the meetup on virtue that you did quite a while back, where you lined up Gita and you lined up the Bible, you lined up and the Tao, and we went through some of the commonalities. But they all, different cultures. We made connections across all of these ancient works, and it was basically just getting out there and attending as many meetups and listening to as many people as possible. Now, I attend also Buckminster Fuller meetups, Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society meetups, where I host my own meetups. Many of them have to deal with economics, but I have a wide range of topics that I can then start to make and say, okay, now what are common principles that I can apply to learning each one of these topics? And then I set a set of goals outside of that, and I start to work towards those goals. And I think that that's, to me, my approach to it. I mean, I think 52 Living Ideas has been the thing that has probably made that process as simple as possible, because we cover such a wide range of topics. And we work with, Mark Stallman, our Yasuhiko, those presentations, Yogeshwar, having access to that level of individual, that level of thinking, has made my journey personally a lot easier. But again, I think it's just getting out there, it's listening, and it's also respecting everybody's opinion. I think that that's really kind of critical in this process, because not to discount what anything anybody says, and then kind of integrate it into ask yourself, why are they saying this? Finally, I think one of the most important things about being a comprehensivist, without a doubt, is the ability to ask a question, a good question. And I think that Stuart Firestein actually we covered him in a meetup, has a very good approach. I think the OODA loop is another example of how you can ask better questions. But that's, I think, the most important part about it being a comprehensivist for me, is that I know if I'm asking questions that are going somewhere where I can make the connections, then I know I'm on my way to being a comprehensivist. And it's an ugly process. It's not something, it's certainly not linear. But it's something that I think is the most important thing, and I've always felt asking a good question as opposed to being able to provide an answer is far more important than in your journey to become a comprehensivist, polymath, or whatever, how you ever want to term it. Anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. So folks, what we're going to do, I'm going to keep giving you a preview of the next stage, so you can start thinking about that. In the next stage, I'm going to invite you to choose one example that most epitomizes, that you most respect about comprehensivism, comprehensivist way of operating. Okay, it could be a small example, it could be a large example, it could be a person, it could be an event, any one concrete example. So that's going to be in stage 4. So stage 3, what we are doing here is to listen to how each of us approaches comprehensivism. What is your approach to comprehensivism? Maritza.
So for me, honestly, comprehensivism, the term, hearing it for the first time, for me would have been with CJ and the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society several years back, before I met you lovely folks here at Untitled Living Ideas. And for me, what it gave me was it gave me a word, and it gave me acceptance in a way. For example, I have all my life been one who followed a question down the rabbit hole. And I've always been one where people look at me weirdly, like, you sure do seem to know a lot about that. Because if something was of interest to me, I just would research it ad nauseum. And I've always had that type of personality. And I worked and I found myself rather surrounded by people who did not seem to be very similarly minded. So there's always that almost apology for not having a laser focus on one thing. So when I first, sat in a discussion group with CJ, speaking about, and CJ does these like marvelous little slices of chunks and manners in which he introduces one to comprehensivism. So when I first sat in a meeting where he's talking about this term and an aspect of it, it was kind of like a light bulb moment for me. And as we've grown here, and especially with 52 Living Ideas and the group and this group and the Thinking Society, it's for me been more of learning to own my jacket, as it were. Like, yeah, I know it's fire engine red, it's mine. And that's, I have felt that in learning more about this concept, it's kind of been like a growing into my own. And then once I'm no longer apologizing for having such a variety of interests, I have room for growth and improvement, and yet even more interest. And it became something where my diverse manner of learning or thinking didn't have the backdrop that it had prior to my being aware that comprehensive thinking was a way of life. It was something perhaps to be desirable, and that I wasn't the only one thinking that. So that's what it means for me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. So I want to comment on both what Joe said and Maritza said. So firstly, Joe, in terms of the number of meetups you attend, I don't know how, but I think you attend more of my meetups than I do. Okay. I don't know how you do it, but it's, I don't know.
It was the 2-week vacation you took.
So that's one thing. So in terms of just exploring, kind of having a very large base that you are exploring, large number of perspectives from multiple cultures, from multiple fields, just taking that in. So having that massive input to draw on, I think that's one large part. The second thing that, two other things that stood out from what Joe said. One is that you're taking this in and then you're setting goals, in the sense that it's not just passively taking in, you are actually, you're setting goals through which everything that you're taking in is being channeled in some way. So that kind of, there has to be an output of some kind. The idea of OODA loop is also, comes into that as well. And then you focused on ability to ask questions, and that as being a crucial thing. The point that you said about listening and respecting others, that is very similar to what Evanique was talking about, of actually engaging with people, other people at a deep level, even when their perspectives are different from yours. The point that Maritza was making was the commitment to actually going down the rabbit holes, in the sense, pursuing your interest, not just saying, hey, that's interesting, and then just moving on, but going in depth to things. And another point that was kind of underlying what Maritza was saying is that in today's culture, specialization is the norm. And to have this kind of approach is quite unusual in today's culture. So, so it's something, and it's a massive stage when you actually, as Maritza puts it, own your jacket, in the sense that, yes, that's my approach to life. Instead of having to apologize for it or being kind of sheepish about it, proudly owning that. So I think those those things stood out. So folks, please would love to hear your approach to comprehensivism. So go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to talk about your approach to comprehensivism. Next up is Mike, followed by Brian Allenby. Mike.
Yeah, so I've kept a notebook through most of these meetups, and my first, so I passed my 1-year anniversary, May 17th. So I'm here.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. 13 months. With
And
you.
many happy returns of the day.
Yeah, with you fine people. And I was going to make a Titanic reference and say just last week I was sleeping under a bridge, and now I'm drinking champagne on the finest ship in the world with you fine people. But 13 months ago, I attended my first meetup with Franklin Lavoie. Remember Franklin? It was a pre-Tao meetup. And I've always taken quotes down, and he said something, he compared his relationship to the Tao like a tree that roots him. That's on page 1 of the notebook. And if I just turn it, then I walk into his Sanjay meetup, and he's talking about the social criterion of, it's just references to John Locke and Peter Singer. And then on the next page is these different stages of consciousness. These are on the first 3 pages of the notebook, and it's pretty much filled. And so after 13 months, it's the vast array and widespread types of topics that I've gone through. And 13 months ago, I sat here thinking to myself that, wow, I am really, really over my head, because I knew I had some expertise in some areas, but in terms of what I was hearing from here, I felt overwhelmed. And I remember presenting with you at the Art of Learning meetup, where you were the first one to share with me about how, no, it's actually a good thing to want to come into certain meetups and feel a little bit overwhelmed and understand that that's just one of the places you're supposed to be. And then perhaps in time, in the same meetup, you're going to feel elevated at some point. And then also you'll give a meetup, or as you've given me a chance to present, sometimes you can then present from an area of expertise. So it's happened to me, and I think this fits in well with the question of how is comprehensivism being used for me. It's allowed me over 13 months to elevate my understanding in a broad range of topics, and it's improved my ability to listen a great deal. Because to be very honest, at the very beginning, the first few meetups that I attended, I remember, so I'm just looking around these boxes and I can just go from memory. I see Rupali's box. I remember coming to some of the Lewis Sullivan meetups about architecture, and I knew that Rupali had been teaching through the Montessori system. And I said, wow, it's like Lewis. I had never heard of Lewis Sullivan. And so what has happened over a 13-month period is, as I went back to these meetups, I started to realize that I can attach what I'm hearing in this new discipline to what it is that I already know. So it's kind of honing the skill to be able to make the connections between disciplines, and also my ability to listen, because at the beginning, it was very hard to listen because you're not as comfortable or as confident when it's your turn to speak. So, I'm spending my time in the queue thinking about, how do I pronounce this word? How do I just thinking about the aesthetics about what I'm about to say. And now in a short 13 months later, I feel so much more comfortable listening to somebody, knowing that I have to speak next. So to me, it's really about a growth mindset that just seems to keep improving after every single meetup. So that has been my take over the last 13 months.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you. So there are 2 things that really stand out from what you said. One is the listening ability, because what happens is that most people, they don't have the growth mindset. They have a fixed mindset. So part of it is they're actually not listening. But once you're committed to listening, it's really astonishing how much you can actually hear. There is actually a lot in the world that you don't know, that is surprising to you, that is contradictory with what you believe. And being able to listen to that, to have the openness to do that. And I think growth mindset is the heart of it, because growth mindset is inherently about being open, of saying you can be more, than what you are now. And that's what you are trying to do all the time. So beautifully put. Thank you. Next up is going to be, let's see, it's going to be Brian Allenby, Judy, Rupali, and Maritza. Brian.
Okay, what I can best do, I think, is describe my path of what I did. It's been over 30 years since I lived in an English-speaking environment. So I've had lots of great experience, learned lots of cultures, and almost learned lots of languages. Never quite succeeded, but anyway. So what I've done is I've developed very much a personal, remote approach to my learning. My first step, which I would want to mention, is the mapping of gaps in my knowledge or experience, which wasn't really a first step. I did start there, but it's an ongoing activity. And I've used things like remote training courses. I've been a major user of, there's a company in the US called The Great Courses, and they really do make great courses. And I've used many of those to fill in gaps. I have quite a vast personal library, which has been very useful to me. Although I have problems with it because it's probably is about 80% electronic at the moment, which I don't get on too well with. But and the other thing is Zoom meetings. Once Daily came along, I attend a high number of different meetings, not just the 52 Living Ideas one. I do others as well in other groups. Some I do in England, some I do in the US. And that helps an awful lot with hearing other people's views, being able to talk with other people, finding out how people view things that I've been studying. So that has been really my approach to sort of improving those gaps and trying to keep myself moving along.
Wonderful. I mean, the point that really stands out that we're not addressed before is looking for gaps, mind the gaps, saying, where are your gaps? Because it is very easy to double up on what you know. And many times, being aware of, and typically you're not even aware of the gaps, but this approach of saying, okay, where are my gaps? I think it's a very powerful one. Thank you. Next up is going to be Judy, Laura, Maritza, and Maritza. Judy.
Okay. So we're looking at our own approach to comprehensivism.
Yes.
So I think I was a comprehensivist without even knowing that I was a comprehensivist. Mm-hmm. And I started pretty late in life, late meaning my 30s, maybe. I went to a seminar. I had no idea what I was going to do or who I was or anything like that. And so I went to the seminar. I was having a moment in what do I do with my life, I went to a seminar, and the seminar was on career management, and it asked two questions: who are you and where are you going? So I couldn't answer those questions. I could not. But what I did was take the counsel of the person that was doing the seminar, which he said, go enroll and take some courses at a university. So I did. And the first course that I went to that I enrolled in was called Art and Ideas. And it really blew my mind. It just blew my mind completely. And so I remember the professor saying something like, societies kill civilizations and dogmas, and they're the ones who are the evil people, the dogmas and all these other things for art purposes. So that started me in that phase of art and ideas and literature and just getting enthralled with that phase of comprehensivism, studying to this day art motifs and I got a liberal arts education at 69 years of age. So it still motivates me to learn and continue learning. That was like my second phase. My first phase after the career part, I also became a very deep comprehensivist. The other one was more breadth, kind of like going here and there and mysticism and esotericism and exotic things and all these other things and art. But this first phase, which I started when I was very young, I started training, cross-cultural training, cross-cultural education, training the trainer. I worked for the Army as a trainer. I also worked with American Express as a trainer. So I was in charge of worldwide training and education with American Express. So I became very deep in the training world. I went to I did the signs and I gave seminars and I became very deep in that world. But that was completely different than the other world, the art world. But somehow I was able to balance both. And I think that's my approach, that I've been able to balance both the mystical artsy ideas with the broad scope of comprehensivism, with the more deep and precise actions in my career and the effect that I have had on others, which has been very, very good based on the evaluations that I've gotten throughout my life. So that's like, both have been balanced. So I think that's my approach.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Judy. And the thing that really stands out for me is this two approaches. One on training in the corporate world, which is all about knowing precisely what people need to do and being able to communicate and make sure that that gets in to anybody in the most explicit way. You're looking for a very specific result and you're evaluating it, making sure that it's all, all done just so. That. And then combining it with this art world, which is all about kind of operating at the edge of your consciousness, trying to put together kind of impressions which are vague and trying to pull them all together and going between these two. So I think that is a very powerful theme in comprehensivism, of being able to do both. Some of the great comprehensivists are able to do both of these things together. They're continuously exploring and exploiting. So it's like, you're going out to explore, that process is going on. And at the same time, there is this exploiting process of whatever you've learned, how do you make it real, make it actually deliver concrete values with it? So those two things. So beautifully put. Thank you.
Okay.
Next up is going to be Laura, followed by Maritza. Laura, what is your approach to comprehensivism?
Well, I think much like Mike, I came to comprehensivism through 52 Living Ideas. It was a new concept to me. And when I arrived at 52 Living Ideas, I was really overwhelmed right from the beginning. It was all this knowledge that I hadn't come across or hadn't forgotten. And it was a little bit overwhelming. I wasn't sure I was in the right place, but I sat through it in the beginning anyway. And, after a while, I was able to keep up and, be able to put these concepts to work. And for me, at this point, I'm finding that I have internalized a lot of what we've learned. And I find when I speak to people now, I'm starting to bring through a lot of the ideas, especially Louis Sullivan has come to mind many times when I speak to people. So in that sense, for me, comprehensivism is good in that it has widened my horizon and therefore in my ability to transmit it when I talk to people. I'm not in a position more than that. I don't, I'm not in work or anything. So for me, it's that.
Wonderful.
And I think it's been really good. And, it's just going to get better. I think I'm a little ahead of Mike in terms of when I came. I came right at the beginning of COVID. So I have a little bit on him, but we're so, you know, we all have our anniversaries at different times. So we should have a big party though, you know.
Wonderful, Laura. Thank you very much. So a couple of observations. I mean, I think you put it very beautifully, like that a comprehensivist experience is part of it is just kind of absorbing things. And then you notice it flowing through you in all your expression, all your life. And I can certainly see Laura, you know, compare Laura today to Laura when she arrived. I think there is a tremendous difference in the ability of, you know, I mean, of course, you know, because, you know, Laura has led a great life before, so that is all helping. But this experience of actually engaging with so many people on so many different topics improves your brain, and it improves your expression, and it improves your life, and it actually shows, and other people around you can notice that what you're producing is richer than what was there before. So thank you very much, Laura. Really appreciate it. Next up is Maritza, followed by Brian Nelson. Maritza.
I wanted to make bring up 2 points that listening to others brought to mind for me. And the first is the concept of syntopic thinking. I find that collaborating more often with other comprehensivists allows for a growth in my capacity for synergetic thinking, and not just a growth, but almost like the muscle is stronger and more in the front, as it were. So I find myself seeking for connections across a variety of things in a way that I would not have done before, even though I've always been one to like follow something down the rabbit hole, like, you know, I'm going to give example. I'm sorry, I know that's your next question, right? But, you know, if you're thinking about, you know, I sweating pipe, people probably don't, I don't know if everyone knows what that is, but, you know, sweating pipe is when you're soldering copper piping, when you're doing housework for a bathroom or sink or something. So it's, you know, one would think that has absolutely nothing to do with finance or absolutely nothing to do with trees. But the idea that, you know, I have this skill because I was curious about how to weld pipes together. The idea that I can use some of my knowledge on tree pruning or on some other aspect mathematically to help with that. It may not have occurred to me before, but now I find that it's almost more natural because we get together here, and in other groups, we get together to actually discuss a vast variety of topics interwovenly. I'm doing that more and more just in my day-to-day. So that was just one thing I wanted to mention, that we that this has begun to mean for me, the merging of, so, you know, I used to more strongly view my rabbit holes, as though, you know, I'm going down and I'm following this interest all the way down, but I wasn't as adept at seeing the manner in which I might be able to also bring it back and interweave it with other things that I'm now falling down a different rabbit hole. So it's kind of like, you know, instead of going down this one rabbit hole and then running back up and leaving it there, I'm bringing some of it with me. And I'm finding that as I'm bringing some of it with me, it's making it easier to jump into this next rabbit hole. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Fantastic point. I mean, the point about value of collaborating with other comprehensivists, because it's not about just you exploring the world. It is realization that this is a faculty that all of us have. This is the ability that all of us have. And just like there is a lot to learn about the world, there is a lot to learn about what you can do and how you can do it. And other people would have figured that out, some things about it, better than you. So listening to them, interacting with them, it's not just even, and that happens at multiple levels. Part of it is inspiration. Part of, oh, I didn't, part of it is knowledge of saying, oh, I didn't know that could be done. But part of it is actually exploration of world, because they are actually showing you a world that they have explored in detail, and they're giving you a map of it, which makes exploration of it a lot easier than if you were to, go down. They have already gone down the rabbit hole, mapped the whole rabbit hole for you, and they're giving you a map. So you can jump into the rabbit hole with the map. Where do I go now? Okay. So there are many, many things. There are also methods of digging rabbit holes that they have, which are different. And so all of that is huge. So thank you. Next up is going to be Brian Nelson, followed by Rupali. Brian.
So in listening, I think the question was, how have I applied comprehensivism in my life?
Yes.
And I found that listening to others, there were basically two approaches, two selections they made, or combinations of these. The applications in these Zoom meetings or meetings like that, and then the applications outside of these Zoom meetings, typically in some prior context. And when I was thinking about it, I was thinking more about the other contexts. So I was more in tune with that. And I really, I'm not sure I have anything to add to what those people said, except I was I was just working in different contexts. And I did find that comprehensivism was very important. I can just give a couple examples, because I did work, I was an international corporate lawyer, which meant I had to do some pretty complex transactions. We once completely reorganized. These are Fortune 100 companies. We completely reorganized a big company in Europe and then spun off its most profitable business there. So we had to separate the profitable business from all the others. And at the same time, we reorganized all the others, which had been an accumulation of earlier acquisitions. So they were being operated more efficiently. And believe me, that lays a lot of different perspectives into play in different countries, because this was all over Europe. So we kind of took over a monastery in Switzerland, and we flew in. The monastery had been turned into a big brewery. It used to be a monastery, it's now a big brewery. We flew in people from all over Europe, from all these companies, and I didn't know that I was going to be in charge of this thing until I got there. And I kind of got to be in charge of it because nobody else could figure out how to approach it. And so I came up with an approach that everybody kind of bought into. And it's really it's just like everybody said, it's listening to other people, having due regard for their concerns, accommodating their concerns as we go forward. And that's come up in other contexts. I've done other deals like that. And but all those, I'll just say all those things that the goal was set, and the comprehensive approach turned out to be very useful. But then in these meetings, the goal is not that when I joined these meetings, and generally as they've progressed, I think the goal has not been set. It certainly was not set for me when we started. And it ties into this, again, to the way I defined the comprehensivism. having due regard for all the perspectives on the question at hand. And so in in the business world, the question at hand was always this goal, and here the question at hand is a little more amorphous. It's a little more up in the air. And so I guess I became interested because, as I once said to Shrikant, he asked me to make a presentation on something of interest to me, and I said, I'm not that interested in things that are interesting to me. I'm interested in things that are interesting to other people. And so that's kind of been it for me, is what's interesting to other people and how do they address these concerns? And that's and you know, it's basically been those big philosophical open-ended questions that people have addressed. But the other thing that's been brought to it is through all these texts that we've been reading, philosophical and wisdom traditions, is that it's not only the questions, but through these traditions, it's what's I've kind of learned or getting a sense for what is the best that life has to offer. And that's kind of laid out in these wisdom traditions. So that if you take that on board with the wisdom traditions, and then the concerns that other people have, there's kind of I feel like there's kind of a convergence there that's occurring in these through these meetups, at least for me. For example, and when I read some of these texts, I sometimes read like more or less logically. And what's the bottom line? Like, is to do this in order to do that, and once you get that, then you do this other thing in order to get that. What's the bottom line? And often the bottom line, not always. There are many other things like growth and learning the things you flag, but often the bottom line in these wisdom texts is peace of mind. And it's expressed in different ways. Some of them explicitly say peace of mind, but others talk about it in different terms. So I think that's really one of the greatest things there is in life. So what is the thing that other people are concerned about? What are their concerns? I'm always very interested in that. But a highest concern that I think has been flagged by these wisdom traditions, in addition to others like growth and the rest, is peace of mind. And then you get it, then you go back and you kind of backfill with the comprehensive view on how to obtain or maintain peace of mind.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Brian, you made so many amazing points. So I want to highlight some of them. So first, I have to say, this is a great example of comprehensivism. A monastery turned into a brewery, which is serving as a setting for a corporate restructuring meeting. Okay, that's a beautiful image. Now, you talked about the distinction between the comprehensivist approach that is needed to do your restructuring of this Fortune 100 company. You have to bring everything, but it has a goal. You know, you're trying to do something and you're using your comprehensive understanding in order to do that. So it's one kind of a thing. And then you distinguish that from the second kind of a thing, which was more kind of exploratory. That's what we do here in 52 Living Ideas, of going into these wisdom traditions. This is similar to the distinction that Judy was making between the training, corporate training, and the exploration of art. So there is the distinction between exploration and exploitation. So the first 4 stages of this discussion format are about exploring, of kind of trying to put as many things on the table as possible so that we can begin to see connections between that. And the last 4 stages are, you know, start to focus on exploitation. So we are going to have this, this section is a little bit longer by its own nature, because it is all about actually hearing perspectives, very rich perspectives from everybody, so that we can fill our minds with all these multiple perspectives as we go forward. Okay, so that's the function of this third stage. One great example that you brought up was that of wisdom traditions. So wisdom traditions, all of them, hold peace of mind, that serenity as a value. And that is there across the traditions, which is not a value which is pursued today. So it's by exposing yourself to those wisdom traditions that you realize, oh, that is a big value. And yes, it is a big value to me. And what that does is that changes your perspective of how you put everything together. So that's a great example of how exploration can give you something completely out of the box. The other point that you brought up again and again of saying, you're interested in what other people are interested in. That's actually a very good formulation, because that is a way, that is actually a shortcut to doing comprehensivism. Because what it's doing is that you're using the interest of other people, the knowledge of other people, their own perspective to throw light on the world that you don't know. So I think, just great observations. Thank you very much. Next up is so the question on the table is, what is your approach to comprehensivism? If you're not spoken before, like Rupali or Katie, you're welcome to talk very briefly about what do you think comprehensivism is, and then talk about your own approach to comprehensivism. Next up is going to be Rupali. Rupali, go ahead.
Thank you, Shrikant. So I'm going to answer the first part, what is comprehensivism? And I'm just going to look at the etymology of the word. It's made up of 4 parts, comprehend, and ism. So there are 4 parts to it. And the first part, com, is just, bringing together, uniting ideas. And so when we are bringing together ideas, then we are thinking in terms of, what are the connections here? So that's one part. Then pre means beforehand or in front of. And so there are ideas that we are thinking of already, but now you're bringing those ideas together. And to then have the ism part is the philosophical part about the comprehensivism. So to kind of bring it all together is, I think, for me, what is comprehensivism is uniting different ideas, taking large ideas, but bringing them in a comparatively smaller focus. Like, for example, today you said, today's focus is just going to be comprehensivism. We could talk about so many other things, but we have a focus. So now taking ideas about one topic and bringing it all together, making connections. How do I apply it to my own life? I would say, when I was a child, I was often known as jack of all trades and master of none. And I didn't know whether that was a compliment or not a compliment.
Mhm.
But now I feel that that's not a bad thing, to know a lot of things, and then pursue the areas that you want to pursue. One of the things that I learned from my art teacher early on was to observe. And he would always say, before you draw anything, you need to observe. And we would spend quite some time just observing a scene before we painted the landscape. And he would have us make a little frame that we could observe from. And so now you're excluding everything else, but you're just focused on those things. And when I started observing, I realized, wow, there are so many things that I didn't know were there. So that's one thing that I apply, is just observing. And then the second gift that I got from my father was the love of reading. He would read to me, and I developed a love for reading. And with the reading, I could start making connections in my own head. And so applying the reading to the observation element, I could make connections and see, oh wow, this subject is related to that subject. And finally, when I trained as an architect, I was able to see the big picture and put that all together. So, as you know, everybody said so many different things, like Joe and Maritza, Evanik. I echo the same, and Mike. I echo the same sentiments in terms of personal growth and the ability to expand my horizons. I think everything starts from the core of my values. So I have my own personal values for my own development. And so then things that are related, and when you see, okay, I'm going to talk about Louis Sullivan, but then guess what? Bhagavad-Gita is related. And guess what? There are universal principles. And so you start seeing those connections and you bring together all these ideas. The other thing is the platform of 52 Living Ideas is fantastic. It really brings together many people to talk about and discuss. Just like Maritza said, this group, having the opportunity to think and talk and express has helped a lot for me. And I feel, like several people have said, Joe mentioned, be curious, ask questions. Those are the key things. I've never been afraid to talk to people. I'm very interested in knowing what people are thinking and doing. So I love talking to them. um, so, in a nutshell, I would say observing, then making connections, reading, doing things in my work or other areas, and then growing and learning from those experiences is how I apply comprehensivism to my life. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rupali. I want to highlight a couple of things. So firstly, the importance of observing. We looked at it in form of listening, but observing, just taking in, being like, as Louis Sullivan puts it, let the life break in upon you. I think that's very big. And then you talked about, that here you get an opportunity of talking about various topics, to various people. So listening and talking, I think both of them are crucial. The other point that you made is about values. This is a point that Joe also started out with. That's a huge thing, because what happens is that, like, your entire heart has to be in it. And when it is, you see connections, you see like, oh, that too is a value. And you see the connections much more. It's a passionate pursuit, and it's values which are fueling that. And the last point you said, that you're not afraid of talking to people. I think that's a huge part. I think most people are too defensive about themselves. They will talk to only certain people under certain circumstances on certain topics. So they're kind of cutting themselves off from people. They're wearing all kinds of masks. So being kind of actually not being afraid, I think it's a huge, huge deal. So thank you. So folks, we're going to go with Katie. And the next question I'm going to ask everybody is going to be about, try to come up with the best example of concretized comprehensivism in action that you have seen. But first, Katie, what is your approach to comprehensivism?
I think mine would be sort of like Brian's. I really liked his comments on other people, like their excitement about topics, expanding your own horizons by listening to them. Because I think the natural human tendency would be to reinforce your own beliefs as a starting point and reinforce your own interests. And I think for myself, it would be I would keep reading and keep reading and keep reading on one particular topic until I hit exhaustion, and then I would switch to the next topic where I would do the same thing. But other people bringing in new ideas broadens a little bit my horizon.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Katie. All right. So now we are on to stage 4, where we are going to talk about examples outside of ourselves of what you think is comprehensivism at its best that you've seen. Something about comprehensive. It could be a person, it could be an act, it could be anything, any example of comprehensivism that you would like to share, that you find particularly fascinating, particularly inspiring. We're going to start with Joel, followed by Joe. Joel, go ahead.
Thanks, Shrikant. I apologize if this is not exactly in this segment that you're leaning towards, but it encompasses several aspects of what you were relating to earlier. And for me, it's a particular experience, and I'm not sure yet whether I'm a comprehensivist or just a Canadian, or if I can be a Canadian comprehensivist. But it relates to an experience I had many years ago when I was in California, and it was also a meetup, but it was long before the days of the pandemic and people would actually meet in person, as strange as that now sounds in our new world. I was in Los Angeles, and I heard about a philosophy meetup in a city outside of LA called, I think it was San Pedro, but I'm not sure, I may have that wrong. And I had to drive because I didn't know the area, and it was getting dark, for about an hour to find this restaurant that it was taking place at. I'd never been before, didn't know any of the people. I get in there, it was a very nice place, and there were about 15 or 20 people there. And atypically, they had a graduate student in philosophy who was delivering a lecture about something. I was really more interested in just being around other people because I'd been quite isolated for a while. So I didn't really care too much about the topic, or I assumed if it's a philosophy meetup, it's not, and it's in a public place, how bad could it be? Anyway, this gentleman delivered a lecture on a topic which I have since forgotten. But before he began his presentation, he asked how many people are in favor of this thesis and how many are opposed. And the group was fairly evenly decided. I don't remember the actual count, but maybe 8 in favor and 7 opposed, or perhaps it was the reverse. At the end of the lecture, it was the group's habit to take the speaker out for dinner and, like Brian's example, have a few beers in the monastery, although it wasn't a monastery. And as we were leaving, the lecturer came up to me, and I've never met him, I never met anyone in the group, and he said, "I want to shake your hand." And I thought perhaps he had confused me with someone else because I didn't know him, I didn't know the subject, I wasn't as scholarly as almost anyone in the group. And I said, "Why is that?" He said, at the end of the lecture, I asked how many people had changed their minds about the topic. And as I said, I don't remember what the topic was. It wasn't too important. He said, in 7 years of delivering this presentation to groups of various sizes, when I asked how many people have changed their minds, you're the first person who ever raised his hand.
Thank you, Joel. Appreciate that. Joe, what is the best example of comprehensivism that you know?
To me personally, or that
To you
I've
personally. Anything that inspires you. It could be a historical person, doesn't matter. You can choose anything.
I mean, I have one that I have experienced myself.
Go ahead.
And then I have one that I think, and it may not be, there's so many there's so many, but
So you can go up to
so
two.
the
Don't
one,
choose more than two.
okay, I'll try it. There's one where in reading Daniel Kahneman and reading about Thinking Fast and Slow and understanding and reading a couple of his papers and understanding heuristics and biases, specifically, availability heuristics, and one of the things that was really beneficial, and there was anchoring and everything. I went in and I was talking to a group of our cybersecurity people, engineers that were building, a database for to secure our ships. And it was called a heuristics database. And what I was able to do was take the concepts that actually Daniel Kahneman had been talking about and relate it to exactly what they were talking about and what they were programming in their database. And which was really interesting in that, because what it was is it allowed me to have a very deep conversation. And they were very helpful for me down the line. And it established a connection that they appreciated the things I had to say. They were fortunate enough to bring me into a lot of other meetings that were productive. So this Thrash database is actually a major part of the Navy. Probably shouldn't have said that, but this is a very important part of what we do for cybersecurity. But this is all based on reading Daniel Kahneman.
Oh.
And so that's the beauty of being comprehensivist, because you really don't know. You're looking at the psychological aspect of things. How can it improve you? What does it mean to have mental shortcuts? What percentage of your decisions are being made, with system 1 versus system 2, all those, what you're trying to figure out the brain, but here it is, it's being replicated again in a database. And that's the beauty of being comprehensivist, is that you're able to not only take something from one domain and apply it to another and make connections that people know are meaningful. And some of the things that they were doing, like, again, anchoring, that they weren't calling it that actually in some cases, but that's what it was. And so that it was one of the first experiences that I had with when I started working where I'm working, and it was really it was a very engaging exercise. So that to me is a practical example that I can provide of what a comprehensivist type of thinking. Now it could have been anything. We could have been reading whatever.
Yep.
But we could relate, but it allows us to make connections in so many different ways. I still find the example of Russell Ackoff that he provided with the students that were going into Case Western to be one of there's two actually he had as a comprehensivist. The students that he taught in the inner city with the silent movies, and when he was able to do to essentially use silent films with subtitles, and the literacy rate went right up. And they looked at it, they were analyzing the problem from their own personal perspectives and not necessarily in a very narrow way. They were trying to attack literacy and using very traditional methods of teaching. And one of the solutions, as everyone may or may not know, is that they took the film, the silent films with subtitles, put them in the cafeteria, and they could leave at any point during the day and go and watch the movies. And the kids learned to read. Their scores went up exponentially. So I think that's really comprehensive thinking, in my opinion. I think that's a wonderful example. Another example is the one where they took the students from Case Western who had never had differential equations, and they were actually supposed to measure throughput of water through a set of pipes through public utilities. And the only thing they were given a book and access to the professors to ask questions. And they were able to not only solve the problems that they were being presented with by the utility companies, but they all tested out of the first 2 years of math at Case Western University. And that's the ability to ask a question, and you're given a problem, you're thinking about it in the real world, and you're applying it across, maybe that may be a little bit more of a narrow example, but nonetheless, it points to the importance of being able to ask a good question, and you can solve problems across multiple domains. So, I mean, to me, I think that we can go on and on because there's so many great examples, but for me, that's a personal example where I was able to make a connection. And then some of the past systems thinking, and there were some great examples during the design way as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Great examples. Maritza, what are the examples of comprehensivist thinking that you know and like?
To me, one that comes to mind is, I forget what year, it's been a couple years now. I read about bioengineers were stuck trying to figure out a way to keep from having vascular cell death when creating trying to regenerate a working heart to make, regenerative tissue. And what they ended up doing was someone who was in botany reached out to them, and they ended up working in tandem. And what they did is they took a spinach leaf and they used the vascular tracts of spinach leaf to create a working model. And it's been like innovative in the field of bioengineering, and it's one of like the frontier most paths forward that they have to, like making an entire vascular heart and being able to like transplant it. So I'd read about that, and I thought that was just, who would have thought that, like, it seems a very unlikely pairing, but it's going to be for the benefit of millions. And so that's the first thing that came to mind here when you're talking about, a great use of comprehensivity from a personal, something slightly more personal to me would be, I met someone I worked with when I was a contractor for the government, and it was just this, tall lady. She was like super tall. She walked in, she had like 4-inch heels on with a skirt and shirt. And she walked in. First of all, she was a female in a sea of males, and she was a minority person. And it turns out she was also herself an engineer, and every stitch of clothing she was wearing, she had sewn herself. And she had also created her own jewelry that she was wearing. And I was like, what? And I actually became friends with this person. And she's like black belt Krav Maga. And I'm like, can I be you when I grow up? And so she's somebody who she has no idea. So I've since introduced her to the concept of comprehensivism, and she has attended a few of your meetups, not too many. She's like horribly shy, but she's somebody who, she walks the walk without even knowing what the terminology is.
Wonderful.
So she's
Wonderful. Thank you, Marissa. So we're going to go, please share any example that you want of comprehensivism in action. I want to give you a preview of the next stage. Next stage is going to be to engage our imagination of saying, suppose you wanted to be comprehensivist on a much more massive scale. What would you do? Don't worry about it being realistic during this stage. This stage is all about engaging your imagination and putting all the ideas that you have, no matter how weird they seem, on the table, okay? About how to be more comprehensivist, okay? Or how you can make the world more comprehensivist if you want. So just let your imagination talk about expanding your comprehensivism. That's going to be the next stage. At this stage, we're going to be talking about concrete examples of what comprehensivism looks like to you at its best. Next up is going to be Judy, Mike, and Rupali. Judy.
Okay, I have a concrete example of something that has been absorbing me since 2016. So it has to do with cross-cultural communications and psychology of self, which includes the study of archetypes and art motifs and visual journaling. So I've been visual journaling and writing about this particular archetype through stories that go from the first story is called The Tale of Two Cultures, and it has to do with cross-cultural communications of the different selves that exist within me. So I have these two cultures within me. So I do a dialogue with these two cultures, and I use this art motif as like the bottom line of what communicates these two cultures. And then the second one is called the New Dark Ages. The second book is called The New Dark Ages, and it's all about how these two cultures react to the moment that we realized that Trump was going to win until he won. The third book is called Survival Manual, and it's all about climate change and Greta Thunberg and all the situations of the world that we're going through, but always these two cultures talking back and forth to each other. And then I introduced a new self that's in the last one, which is the COVID archetype. So there's a new self now that is the one that is kind of like a journalist. And so there's another self now in the picture. So I'm really obsessed with this. A lot of people think that I'm kind of wishy-washy and crazy and all these other things, but I don't care. You know, I'm having fun and I'm writing and writing and writing and writing. It's just like I'm possessed. I really swear, I swear that I feel I'm possessed. I think that's a comprehensivism. I don't know. It could be craziness. I don't know, something else, but I'm synthesizing information more than anything. I read the Red Book and the Black Books of Carl Jung, and they greatly influenced me in doing this. So, and I took several courses with a group called Applied Jungian, which is in Australia. And I've studied the Red Book and the Black Books and the writing of the journals and archetypes and all these things. So in that sense, it's comprehensivism because I've gone deep into the study of archetypes, and then in the other sense, that the broadness of the whole self dialogues and the cross-cultural communication, that is more like a magical realism type of writing. So I make all these voyages and how my great-grandparents travel from whatever to whatever and what they carried with them. And I make up these stories about what they talked about and what they did and all that. So it's like fascinating. I do a lot of ancestry studies. And so that's basically my example.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Judy. That was really fascinating. Next up is going to be Mike, Rupali, and Brian. Mike, what are some of the examples you see?
Yeah, I remember seeing a Jordan Peterson podcast where somebody was asking him about why he doesn't go on stage during the lectures with notes. And he said he kind of prefers to create this kind of organic or in the moment back and forth with the audience. And he says he makes eye contact as often as he can with people that are in the closer rows. And you know, if you've watched him lecture, you realize that he is covering quite a swath of topics and disciplines. And obviously the man has the ability to go in depth. So I'm listening to this interview and I'm going, wow, that's to me a great example of somebody who's doing that in real time. So that's applied comprehensivism, right? He's telling you why. So obviously he's done all the work. It's all in there, but he's telling you also that I want to be on the stage and decide in the moment what's going to come out when and what I think is applicable. In the same interview, and he's done this in several occasions, as you know, he's had trouble with his health over the years. He's also gotten very emotional during the interviews. I've seen him in tears sometimes, where he's gone from explaining his method of delivering content, and then something will trigger him to talk about, you know, his daughter was sick, his wife was sick. He went through a fair amount of trauma, and I found him kind of sliding in between his intellectual academic approach to life and then becoming extremely emotional and showing his emotional intelligence in real time. So that there's numerous podcasts, so many of him, but if you can ever look out for the ones where he talks about his delivery and then see him get emotional in the same interview, I think that that's a really good example.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Next up is going to be Rupali, followed by Brian. Rupali.
Hi, Shrikant. So the question is, what's an example of a comprehensivist? I would say you. And ever since I've known you, I've always seen this dimension of you where you are so interested in so many different things.
Okay, just for reference, I have known Rupali since her son was born, and that was about 25 years ago. So she knows me for a long time, and she's a very good friend. So she knows me pretty well. So go ahead, Rupali.
Right. And so, the various projects you would undertake and dive in, learn, master that project, whether it was learning to draw or learning to write or learning to trade or learning to do computers, whatever it was, learning to write, you always were able to and are able to excel in what you do. And that's because of your comprehensivist approach. So that's one example. I would say another example comes from my profession of education. So Maria Montessori, I would say, is a great example of comprehensivist. She was a doctor, a physician. She wanted to become an engineer. She couldn't become an engineer, so she said, all right, I'll become a doctor. So she had this scientific, mathematical, analytical mind, but she also was very interested in the arts. And when she worked with children, excuse me, she was able to put together her concepts from science, from observation, to developing a new pedagogy altogether that changed the way people looked at education. And then a more recent one, I would say, in my own experience with, excuse me, with my own experience working with children is a competition called Destination Imagination. And it's an organization that challenges children in different competitions, whether it's science, building competitions, there's a theater component to it, a community service component to it, an architectural component to it, engineering component to it. And it requires a team of 7 children to work together. So there is research, there's reading, there's writing, there's communication, there's coming up with new solutions, imagination, creativity. So that project, it just provides like a springboard for children to develop the idea of comprehensivists, or to become a comprehensivist themselves. So those are the 3 examples. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rupali. Next up is Brian. What examples do you know of? Maybe 1 or 2, and then we'll go to the next part about imagination. Brian, go ahead.
So the question was, come up with the best example of
Yes.
comprehensivism that I'm aware of. So what's a best example of this? I think it's a group. What I'm looking for is a group engaged in activities valued or admired by others over a long period of time. So in other words, well, we'll leave it at that. And what I came up with is these different kinds of groups. I'll very quickly just list them. A government, that's the US Constitution, our founding fathers. Absolutely amazing. A group engaged in activities valued and admired by others over time. Just everything they brought together to achieve that is amazing. I think any company is an example of comprehensivism, but the best examples again are the ones that are valued and admired by others over time. And there's a very good one in India's Tata Steel is a great company in that regard for various reasons. I'm familiar with that company. You know, any big company has controversies, but that's a very good company, valued and admired by many, many people over time. Everyone agrees they've done great things. Another one in this country is Hershey Chocolate. I'll just flag that it's run by a trust, and the trust puts all of its money into an orphanage that's run. The orphanage is set up in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So that would be a company. A government is a group. A company is a group. You can have a project. The United Nations did a project called the Sustainable Development Goals. This was a 15-year project, and they solicited from entities all over the world, not just governments, but entities all over the world, and civil government, companies, and the rest, and then influential thinkers. What are the most important goals for humanity? And they came up after this 15 years, they came up with a consensus as what they are, and then how to achieve them. And this Paris Accord that on environmental that everyone talks about, and very obviously very, very important, is just a very small part of those sustainable development goals. The way they did it and the goal of it, very comprehensive. It was an amazing, amazing project. And if you want to flag people, I agree, Maria Montessori, there's so many. The one that's accessible because he is admired really, but Benjamin Franklin is the one that I think of, but we don't need to get into the detail. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Great examples. Thank you. All right. So we have finished 4 of the stages. So I'm going to do abbreviated version of the remaining 4. And the way I'm going to do that is that the next stage is going to be on imagination, of coming up with the most imaginative ideas you can think of. They can be very weird, but let's try to keep them short because I want to leave enough time for the rest of it. I'll also give you a preview of the stage after that. The stage after that is actually building this into the world. You know, what are your most practical, simple ways? So on one hand, we are doing a kind of imagination out of the box, way out there ideas in the next stage. The stage after that, we're going to say, what is the simplest way, in a practical way, you can actually make the world a little bit more comprehensivist? How can you implement that? So that's going to be, we are moving into kind of practical orientation. First, stage 5 is going to be on the most imaginative ideas that you have of increasing your own comprehensivism. So just go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to share. Let's keep the remarks in this section brief because I want to leave enough time for the remaining 3 sections. Evanique, what would you do?
So there's this concept that's called, I don't even know what it's called, but it's basically like being unhoused. And it's like not having a permanent dwelling. It could be RVing, it could be staying in different Airbnbs. The point is that you're traveling and you're staying in different places and you don't have a permanent address. You don't have a permanent place to really call your home by choice, not from circumstance, but by choice, to be able to travel the country and explore and just kind of experience different things. So if like money was no object, and the wildest thing you could do is just to be unhoused voluntarily.
Wonderful. So let's make it even more challenging. You say, what can you do? What are the wildest ideas you can, most imaginative ideas you can come up with to increase your comprehensive ability as fast as possible? That's whatever Evanik presented is an example of that. So Laura, what do you think that is? And let's try to keep this brief so we can have time for the remaining sections. Laura.
Okay. For me, the comprehensive thing I'd like to do is develop a new way of teaching mathematics.
Okay.
Okay. The preface is that your whole curricular goal from beginning to end is how to teach to learn. How do you teach students how to learn mathematics? And basically teaching metacognitive strategies necessary to do that, and for them, those strategies that they have to learn, internalize, and become their language that they use to help them guide their own learning throughout. And this gives you the ability to write all kinds of wonderful projects, problems for them to solve in all kinds of areas, and have many levels, and let them go as fast as they can. Second grader could be at third grade or fourth grade level, and keep it wide open all the way through to the very end. And just every year, just, more and more wonderful problems, create a wonderful bank of problems that everybody could use together, to use for teaching purposes. And that's what I have to say, and get this wonderful software program that I know that would help them for, from K to 8 to 12.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Next up is going to be Mike, followed by Joe. Mike.
Yeah, this one I've actually done before. I tried to find something or some area that you could think about as a whole and then break it down into so many different disciplines. And I found that a really good one is flight, the airline industry. So if you look at a plane from cockpit to tail, and you just think about what it is already that exists there. So you're going to be talking about what? Forget the electronics that are in the cockpit, right? But then you have the accuracy of the relay between the pilots and the air traffic controllers, going back to the flight attendants' interpersonal skills, artistry versus engineering. You talk about aerodynamics, and on and on and on. And you'd be absolutely amazed. You take a legal pad, just draw a little stick figure of a plane, and then go and take it in as many different directions as you can. So pick another topic. It doesn't have to be a plane, and break it down into as many parts as you can.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Next up is Joe.
So I'm going to actually steal something from Rupali and pretty much talk about some of the things that you do, where you have done a lot of traveling and gotten out there and specifically been in museums, looking at the Madonna on the Rocks, I believe, to the point where they thought you were going to steal it. I think that those types of experiences specifically is perhaps the best way to get that kind of, to become more comprehensivist. And your experiences could be in a number of different areas, not just the realm of intellect. It's also could be the realm of, I find things like yoga or things like that to be very enlightening. And so meditation, things like that, allow you to see things. So if I was, that I think that those types of things are very, are almost essential to becoming a comprehensivist. Otherwise, it becomes a little bit too much theory.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Maritza. Maritza, what are your ideas?
So I've been toying with the idea of trying to teach somebody to play the guitar. The problem is that I know zero about playing a guitar, but I had the crazy thought that if I found somebody else in some other place who didn't know how to play guitar, and I tried teaching them, they don't know how to play, so I couldn't make them any worse. So maybe I would learn, because my thinking process here was that I have found that the best way to learn something more deeply is to teach it. So I was wondering if that was a way to hack the guitar.
Wonderful. Teach what you don't know. Wonderful. Thank you. All right. So what we've done is that we have deliberately done an abbreviated version of this section. This section can be dramatically expanded, just like all our other sections. Next, we're going to be practical, and we're going to be looking at the world as a whole. How can we make the world better with comprehensivism? How can you bring comprehensivism to the world in the most simplest, realistic way you can imagine? So try to kind of put your thinking caps on. Try to say, how would it actually work? Are there any ideas that you can think of which can make world more comprehensivist? Evanik, so I want to give you a preview of the next section, next two sections. Next section after this, we're going to be talking about our valuing of comprehensivism. What does comprehensivism do for us? Why do you love it? So that's going to be next. So right now we are focused on comprehensivism and the world and what it can do. You can also answer the question, what would happen if more people were comprehensivist? But we're now focused on the world. Any thoughts about comprehensivism and the world and what it would do? If, or how would you do it, and what ideas that you have about bringing comprehensivism to the world? It's going to be Evanik, Rupali, followed by Joe. Evanik.
I would think, encouraging people to learn something together. Remember to give me a great idea with the guitar idea, and, maybe not teaching and teaching something that you don't know. And maybe, just kind of like partnering with people that want to learn about something. And you guys learn together, and you guys teach each other. And that's how you can bring it to the world. Just bring a topic that people are interested in and learn about it. What would that do for the world? I think it would create understanding. So even if you disagreed about a certain thing, you would at least understand the other person's perspective, and maybe you wouldn't demonize them. And I think what that would do is it would help the world operate at a higher level and help people operate at a higher level. And you would have people that experience more joy in their lives. And that's not the same as happiness. I think, you still have to roll with the punches, and comprehensivism can teach you how to do that. But you can find joy in even the worst situations. I'm thinking of Viktor Frankl, right? He found joy in the worst situation, some would say the most awful situation. And he learned to make it work for him. So I think that's what comprehensivism can bring to the world.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Rupali, Joe, Judy, Laura, and Mike. So Rupali, the question is, now we're trying to say, okay, what can comprehensivism do for the world, and how can it do it? So what, any ideas about how we can make the world more comprehensivist, and any ideas about what would it do to the world? Go ahead, Rupali.
Yeah, thank you. So I think one thing that I personally believe in is lead by example. So doing, practicing comprehensivism and kind of modeling that for everybody around you. And people, like, in our group on 52 Living Ideas, we all get together and we model it for each other, and then we learn from each other. So that's one way, one person at a time, kind of expanding it. The second is education. I think the Montessori education does a phenomenal job in developing comprehensivism. For example, when students are learning, they're not just learning all of the subject areas in compartments. In Montessori, they are learning it as a whole. And when you have that holistic view of a topic, of a subject, then you're training your mind at a very young age to think comprehensively of a subject. So if now, Maria Montessori has talked about this, and Louis Sullivan has talked about it, Buckminster Fuller has talked about this, Yasuhiko talks about it. If we have people who then can think comprehensively and apply themselves to creating their environment in that spirit of a holistic approach, then surely the world would be a better place, because every human being would be occupied at their highest potential and working in harmony. So I think that that's what comprehensivism can do to the world. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rupali. Next up is Joe, followed by Judy. Joe.
That's tough to follow. I think Rupali actually captured a lot, because I was thinking about it along what Buckminster Fuller himself had actually talked about was how we have to go about learning and educating people in general. You need to take a different approach to learning. And it was a comprehensivist approach, but it was just essentially, you're becoming taking a wide range of classes and seeing the connections between them. You're not necessarily focused on just being an engineer per se or something along those lines. So I think that that's a really critical part. But one of the goals of comprehensivism is something called ephemeralization. And this is a very practical approach that Buckminster Fuller has talked about. And the basic premise is that you do more with less. But he adds another component in there. He also includes ethics. So you're doing more or less, you're doing things more efficiently and effectively, but you also have an ethical component where you're considering the whole system. So you're coming up with solutions to problems that are, considering the whole. If that, I know that's a bit abstract, but there are some very concrete examples that Buckminster Fuller has throughout his career. Geodesic dome and how that worked, and the fullerene, things like that. These are very practical examples, and I would go, that's where it falls under the category of leading by example. So he's not only taking it from, this concept of a comprehensivist, but he's actually creating things in the world so that people can see them as a different path. And he's doing it in a way that is, he's trying to hold himself to the most highest ethical standards, which he's trying to do it for the betterment of everyone involved. So I think ephemeralization is actually a very powerful concept, doing more with less, but doing it within the confines of nature. It's almost Louis Sullivan-like to a certain degree.
Wonderful. Thank you. I really like these examples. Buckminster Fuller, Russell Eckhoff, or Louis Sullivan, all of these are architects, and they are drawing inspiration from such a large, vast pool of nature and of civilization, and then actually transforming the world systematically. So that it's a fantastic example of somebody using comprehensivism to transform the world. Thank you. Next up is Judy, followed by Laura. Judy.
Okay, so I have two kids. Both of them are in education in high school. One of them has a program for high school students preparing to go to college. And the other one has a senior program to prepare seniors to go into apprenticeship programs in industries. So what I will do in the real world is incorporate the model of living ideas into this curriculum, both for college kids and for apprenticeship, for college-bound kids and for apprenticeship type kids, because I don't think they have anything like this in there. But what they have told me, what they do, and they're pretty open to creative things. Both of my children are very involved. One of them has a PhD, and the other one has a lot of experience in dealing with children. He founded a school, etc. So, but they've never heard of comprehensivism nor the living ideas model. They have never heard of this. So I think that you guys need to go public or something.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We need to do more. We need to do more of kind of bringing.
It's a great way of learning comprehensivism and any other subject, Dante, whatever, moral development, any virtues, all the subjects that you have covered. And I've only been with Living Ideas, 6 months? I haven't even been from the beginning. And I've learned so much in these last months that I just can't even imagine. Or I can imagine how other people that would have this, and I don't know how I bump to it, but if you make it some sort of a public enterprise where you can sell your idea to school curriculums and to people that are doing these types of classes for students, I think that you would have some sort of success with Living Ideas. I think so, with the kids of the future, so they can learn about comprehensivism and other things too, this way, the dialogue way, and taking a subject really deep and really broad, just any subject. People don't do this. Kids don't do this.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's something that absolutely I need to do. Next up is going to be Laura, followed by Mike. Laura.
Talking about that would require classrooms to be interactive and loud and making noise, and God forbid they do that. Anyway, what I was thinking of for my own idea from the curriculum that I want to develop, I think it's comprehensive in the way that it is going to build one curriculum model for all grades throughout the whole time. And it also, in the fact of being able to develop any kind of problems you want at any grade level, brings many topics, possibility for many topics to be incorporated at every level. You can have the same topic from grade 1 to grade 12 if you want to be very creative with it. It can be done. So I think it's a big endeavor, but I think I will put my money on it that these kids will be really well equipped to go ahead in math, because I think they will be given the will to learn and do math with this kind of curriculum. They won't be bogged down with just doing skill and drill that means nothing to them. And with that, having the ability to take on any kind of problem because they have the skills, they will go further on in college years and potentially, get through calculus and various subjects that they need to go on to do things like engineering and medicine and all those kinds of, and further science, which is really critical. We're not producing enough scientists in the United States. So hopefully what my curriculum would do would be to finally produce more scientists, because we'd have some success in mathematics, because they had a good grounding. They were taught that X is a symbol in first grade for the number 2, or something like that. Give them an idea so that when they get to algebra, they don't go, they get around scared, So we can do things to really make it better right from the very beginning if we are smart. So
Thank
that's the idea.
Thank you, Laura. Next up is going to be Mike, Brian, and Maritza. Mike.
Yeah, I can only echo, Rupali made the point first, and then Joe echoed, and others did as well, about modeling. I think it's a terrific way to pass it on. I was out to dinner tonight, and I had to excuse myself because I had to come here. And, you know, I did say why I was going. I'm part of the meetup group. I didn't sell it. I didn't put it into, you know, like really make a pitch for something. But if people see you repeat that process, you know, oh, I forgot Monday night you have a poetry meetup. It becomes part of your schedule that people know. After a while, people are going to say, you know, I could sit in front of the TV and binge watch a series on, or, you know, what is Mike doing, you know? And just another quick example, my goddaughter, who's 14 now, about a year ago at 13, we'd sit around her table after dinner. I'm there every Sunday for dinner. And we'd have a little salon, you know, we'd start chatting up each other about current events. She's really emotional. I mean, she's 13, right? So, I mean, she's a young woman, but within a year's time, she's becoming more measured because of the conversations that we're having. So I think, again, the home run is from the modeling.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Next up is going to be Brian, followed by Maritza. Brian.
So, let's see, the question is, looking at the world as a whole, how can we make the world more comprehensivist? So I guess to me, the answer is one person at a time, generally. But you can do this in groups too. And here's, I think, the approach. Put people in a situation where their existence is at stake, and don't provide them with the answers. They will very quickly become comprehensivists.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, I don't want to beat it to death, but Judy said earlier, and this it just resonated with me tremendously. You know, at some point she didn't know who she was or where she was going with her life. So that's her existence is at stake in that. That's one way of understanding. I went through that in college. I mean, and that was a very painful, difficult part of my life. But I could tell you, all of my senses were alert, all of my tendons were out. I was a comprehensivist trying to figure out what the heck I was going to do with my life. Put people out, pioneers, the American pioneers, throw them in the middle of the American desert. They very quickly become comprehensivists. After World War II, the Germans, I've read some of the biographies of Germans after World War II. That country was totally demolished. They had nothing. They very quickly became comprehensivists. And the Germans, that's important, you know, they lost all support, put them in a place where they have no support. The support in the past is gone. So that would be, you know, I felt that way in college. I didn't feel like I had any kind of support from my past, nothing to build on there. The Germans, their past had been wiped away, and they knew they couldn't build on that foundation again. They very quickly became comprehensivist. So that's it. That's my speech.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. I have to point out that this is the theme of Bhagavad-Gita.
Exactly. That's what happens in these wisdom traditions. These books put you in a position where your existence is at stake. And that's also in the New Testament. Jesus doesn't say, you know, I came here to give you a fuller life. He also said, oh, and by the way, the world's coming to an end like tomorrow. So get yourself sorted out. So
thank you. Next up is going to be Maritza.
I would say, and this is holding some other folks here who've spoken, but see one, do one, teach one. I think that if all of us here do that, and we encourage everyone we encounter to do the same, it's, you know, it's an infection, it'll spread. And so I think that that's the best way, like, you know, the concept of comprehensivity makes us stronger. So when we go out and interact with other people, hopefully it will encourage them to be stronger.
Wonderful. All right, so now we come to the last two sections, which will build on everything. So we have, we started out by saying, okay, we're just going to focus on this one thing, comprehensivism. Then we said, what is it? Try to capture it as best as we could. Then we expanded by respectfully hearing what everybody had, everybody's approach to comprehensivism. Then we looked at some specific examples outside of ourselves of comprehensivism at its best. Then we imagined, what can we do with comprehensivism? That was an unusually short section. It normally would be about 5 times that size, okay? Then we talked about how will it change the world? How, if you wanted to use it to change the world, what would you do? Okay. Now we have the final 2 sections. First one, it's the 7th one. It's going to be about motivation and value. Why do this? What does it do for you? What does it personally mean to you? You're not looking at how at this point, you're saying, what does it do for you? As a being, as you, what does comprehensivism do for you? So try to express in brief, what has comprehensivism done for you? What does it mean to you? So it's about values. And then we will go to the final section where we will close off. So go ahead and type an exclamation mark to talk about, how do you feel about comprehensivism? Why do you value it? What value is it to you? We'll start with Joe, followed by Evanik. Joe.
This is a deep question and a really important one. One reason I think that, and we've really kind of covered this, I think, in the most in the Gita, it's knowledge, and it's a good for not only us, but for other people, the people around us, so that we kind of start to have an understanding of ourselves, so that our interactions are actually much better as well. Like, so by being a comprehensivist, trying to get the knowledge, or learn as much as we possibly can, we can relate with other people in a much more deep and authentic way. We can connect to them where they are, and there's nothing that's more there's nothing that's more invigorating to see when you're connecting with someone and you're talking about something they want to talk about, and you're able to have a good conversation with them. It's inspiring. And it's also, it's kind of what it's all about. I mean, it really is. It's how you can use it to help other people as well. So that's the key, is that you're able to bring people up, and they simultaneously, and let them know that they're not alone. And I think that's why you learn. You don't learn. There recently, I just really quickly, I learned about, I was talking about this with Mike on another conversation, but it was Andre Agassi. He'd become the greatest tennis player in the world, but he hated it. He just said, I hated it. And what he found was, when he started to think about how he was entertaining other people, and started to thinking about tennis as something bigger than just the sport, he was able to get past and actually find purpose in his life. Well, we can do that as well. We can do that on a grand scale. We don't have to just do it with one particular skill set. We can do it with all the other skill sets. And I think the Gita actually captures that out of the three texts that we've covered. The importance of knowledge. You know, you've spoken before. It's more important to learn than to eat. You know, sometimes in Indian culture. Well, there's a reason for that. It's not just to learn for yourself. It's to learn for yourself and everyone else.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Evanik, what does comprehensivism mean to you personally?
For me, it helps me to accept reality for what it is. And I'm going to go off the Gita, where it talks about accepting reality and not expecting things, or, you know, surpassing the desire of things, because that's not something that's within your control. That's something that's in your periphery. It's like you're doing the action not to get to a goal, or not to have the goal, because you could do an action and not get to a goal. You're doing the action for the sake of the action and to get you closer to who you are. In the Gita, it's the Brahma, but it gets you closer to the center, and it gets you closer to who you are. And the more you know who you are, the more you give other people permission to be who they are. And, you know, they can be more comfortable around you. They may not understand comprehensivism, but they see it in you, and then they can understand it that way. And I think, like I said, dealing with a reality and accepting reality also helps other people deal with reality and accept reality, because a lot of people, I think, want to see things as the way they want them to be rather than what they are, which is not necessarily the most healthy thing in the world. And what it'll do is it'll help you to accept what is happening and to control how you react to that. So I think for me, it helps me deal with reality and and to try not to control so much of what happens, and not to, you know, not to be like pie in the sky about it. Like, well, I want this to happen, and then you're upset when it doesn't happen. And, you know, it also gives you a sense of self-worth in that you can deal with it, right? Like, you can deal with the hard things of life, that you have this sense, when you have the sense of who you are, you know what you can handle, and you know that you can handle it in a way that is useful, and you can learn from it and you can grow from it. But that only comes by, you know, learning about different topics, and, you know, being open to learning about different topics, and being open to learning about different people, and talking to people, and accepting who people, because when you accept who you are, you can accept who the other person is, and you can know what to expect from that person, instead of having that person. I think it's like when you know who you are, you give permission, like you can accept who other people are and not who you want them to be. Because who you want them to be, if you are accepting people, if you're expecting people to be who you want them to be, you'll be disappointed every time. And so, you know, I think that's key, is like you're accepting them for who they are, and you're accepting yourself for who you are.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. This is just amazing. I'm going to listen to everything, and then I'm going to summarize it, and then we will go to the next section. So the question is, what does comprehensivism mean to you personally? Why do you value it? What does it do for you? Next up is going to be Mike, Maritza, and Laura. Mike.
I think there's a great practical value. I think it was Judy. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Judy when we had the meetup about the comfort zone. And I asked her in the breakout room, what do you think? And she said, comfort kills. And I kind of like what she said. And the reason is because studying, or if you want to be a comprehensivist, it takes work. there is some rigor. I mean, we went through the design way, and there are some topics that we're tackling that are difficult, and you need to stretch in order to get through it. You have to look up vocabulary words. There are people you don't know. You might want to try to have an idea of what era something took place in. You know, when did Copernicus say this, or when did so and so say that? Because if you start to get a feel for when these dates and these people lived, then those cross connections become a lot more crystallized, right? But you can't just attend the meetup and walk away saying, oh yeah, now, you know, I'm on to the next step. It takes a little bit of work in between. And you also have to follow up. You know, you have a notebook. Okay, great, I have a notebook. But if I don't open that notebook up and review a word or a concept I didn't know, it kind of loses some of its fizzle, right? So I think practically it's a great way, especially as if you're not a kid anymore like me, to keep yourself sharp and keep yourself moving.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. So Maritza, what does comprehensivism mean to you personally? What does it do for you?
For me, I think it actually helps to merge values, or maybe solidify some concept of values. So it had not ever previously occurred to me that curiosity could itself be a type of value from a personal perspective. And so as I embrace the concept of comprehensivity, I see that it can be. So for me, the idea of, that eternal curiosity being a value is quite enticing. And I also find that, a value that I do hold in very high esteem, and I always have, of honesty, it's more easy to embrace the value of honesty when having the concept of comprehensivity, because you don't feel like you have to kind of hide some of the things you're interested in, like, as much. So, I used to feel like when I'm hanging out with these people 15 years my junior, and they're all, playing in the dirt and creating community gardens, I was like, I am so not telling this artsy crowd that I do finances. They might kick me out. And as I've learned to embrace, the concept of comprehensive learning, and, the fact that having more variety of skill set is something to be cherished, I find that I can be more true to both myself and those with whom I interact. So I am strengthening my value of honesty to myself and to others. And, Joe mentioned knowledge, but for me, the one that comes to mind is understanding. I never had a problem with the seeking of knowledge and understanding, but I find that embracing comprehensivity for me makes it easier to achieve the understanding side of that equation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marissa. Next up is going to be Laura, followed by Rupali and Judy. Laura, why do you?
Yeah, I can't remember what I'm going to say. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I think from my perspective, it gives me greater authenticity when I want to speak to people. And I like that because oftentimes I'm in a position of being a helper person for people. And if I'm going to give advice, I need to be able to be sure that I'm giving good advice and advice that they can trust. And so I think that's what I have to say about it for now.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Next up is Rupali. Rupali, why do you value comprehensivism?
So, I mentioned earlier that people used to call me Jack of all trades, master of none. The thing is that I've always liked to have many things going on at the same time. And that just, I think that's how my mind works, is I need multiple things. And what happens when I'm working, I have to focus on my school and the work that's required there. I can't lose focus and attention there. But by taking my free time to work on or to discuss ideas with others, like this platform or other meetups, my family members, my friends, it allows me to be creative. It allows me to think about problems at my work in a very different manner and approach problems in a very creative way. So, for example, I'll give you an example. I had a problem at school with a few families who had questions about the philosophy of the school and the way things were going on in a certain classroom. And when I was listening to Bhagavad-Gita and uh, we were talking about Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga and Karma Yoga, that meetup helped me resolve this other issue at the school because I could take the time to observe, to form analysis and approach the problem with compassion and love and not be defensive about it. And everything, when I actually did the actions, everything just worked out so easily. And that's one example. Another is when there was a meetup by Chet Richards about certain to win, and he had done a presentation on how you can solve things creatively. Like you take different parts and combine them, and when you combine those different parts, you come up with a completely new solution. But you don't see that solution unless you take things apart. And what comprehensivism does for me is it gives me multiple ways to think about issues at hand and resolve those problems. It also has made me a very peaceful person. Like I don't get hassled by things because once you start seeing the connections, you see, okay, this is the same principle in everything. There's no need to worry about it. It's going to take care of itself. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rupali. Next up is Judy. Judy, what does comprehensivism do for you? Why do you value comprehensivism?
I value comprehensivism in two ways. One is that it gives me courage to learn new things. For example, now I'm trying to learn about how to die well. So I'm really getting into it. I'm taking a class and I'm discussing this with several people in groups, webinars. For me at my age, it's really important to learn how to die well, how to prepare for death, for dying. And also that's number one. So also another area that I want, that has been like a taboo area for me, has been like alchemy, the archetypal part of alchemy. So I want to learn more about that. It fascinates me. It just calls me for some reason, this thing about the philosopher's stone and archetypes and things that we don't really understand why they're there. Why have they been with us for thousands of years? Okay, so that's the first one. And the second one is that I find commonalities with groups like this one. And that is very important to me. So I go like from an ego consciousness to eco consciousness, sharing, compelling to talk about things that you probably were afraid to talk about or embarrassed to talk about or scared to talk about because somebody with, but then all of a sudden other people have similar thoughts and they validate you and you validate others, and it's like a two-way street. It's just combining energies to explode into so much knowledge and so much information. So that's why I value it. It gives me that strength.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Judy.
Mhm.
All right. Now the final section, the 8th section, is going to be on habits. On how do we actually, what habits can you do to increase your comprehensivism? Let's look a little bit further. Look at a year from now, 5 years from now. If you want to be even more comprehensivist 5 years from now or 1 year from now, what habits do you need? What habits do you think you should add? How can you build comprehensivism into your daily life, into your moment to moment as a method of processing, into your schedule, weekly schedule, monthly schedule, yearly schedule? If you wanted to create this habit of increasing your comprehensivism, what can you do to build that habit? So what habits will make you more comprehensivist? That's going to be the final question. And then I want your feedback on this discussion format of exploring a topic in this way. I will summarize at the end what the discussion format was, and then you can tell me how it worked for you. So the question now on the table is, what habits will you internalize in order to make you more comprehensivist? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to answer. Rupali.
So something that I have started practicing is called miracle mornings. And that is a habit of doing 6 things in the morning before you start your day. So silence, affirmations, visualization, exercise, reading, and scribing. And when you do this, and I just started I started taking about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes to do this in the morning. And within 2 weeks, I started noticing that I was more creative. I could compose poems, I could sketch, because it allows me to focus. Everybody else is quiet in the house at that time, and my mind is very alert in the morning. So, by having that habit of waking up just a little bit earlier and consciously applying myself to doing the savers module has been helpful. The other habit that I found helpful is
Rupali, can you speak more into your mic, and can you repeat
Sure.
the 6 things that are part of the miracle morning?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
The 6 things about miracle morning is called, the acronym is SAVERS. S for silence, A for affirmations, V for visualization, E for exercise, R for reading, and S for scribing. So every morning doing these 6 things. And as I would literally have a timer for 2 minutes to do every one of these, because I didn't want to spend a lot of time. And then I increased it a little bit more and more and more. One thing is, while doing silence, it's really just meditating on your breath. And I could increase my own capacity. The second habit is reflecting on goals and values. So at the beginning of every year, I look at my values and I set my goals for myself. And then based on that, my actions are kind of aligned. Of course, I go off track many times, and I need the 52 living ideas to bring me back on track. So, it's work in progress, but I feel that I keep working. The other thing that I found helpful is actually doing something creative, whether it's writing, learning to draw, learning to sketch, learning to read, and meeting people or working with people who are also interested in doing something creative. So I would say those 3 habits have helped me continue my journey in comprehensivism.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rupali. Next up is Evanik, followed by Joe. Evanik, what habits?
I think silence in the morning is really good. I think reading a chapter of a book in the morning has also been really helpful. I think reducing the amount of social media you intake and reducing the amount of television that I intake has helped clear my mind. It's helped me calm down. I think doing things such as like the topic of exploring with Brian, and also with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society, being a host, that means I have to learn more about a topic and research it and do that. And sometimes I regret my decision and then it all works out. But so it becomes harder before it becomes easier. But doing that helps me to focus on a topic that I really want to learn about. I think also, like one of Mike's meetups is being comfortable with being uncomfortable. So when I'm an introvert by nature, so a lot of times when I'm going to be in a social situation with people I don't know, I may want to just think of a reason why I can get out of it. Actually jumping in and just doing it anyway helps increase my knowledge of people and really just jumps me out of my comfort zone. So those are things or habits that I have that, and also just jumping into something new in general, even either at work or, just exploring something different, but especially at work, like jumping into something that I don't know and figuring it out, it's key. So those are some of the habits.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Marissa. Joe, what habits have helped you and what habits are you planning to cultivate in order to be more comprehensivist?
I think the habit that, and Rupali has been kind enough to share that her approach to the morning regularly, so like with me, so I've incorporated that, and that is very helpful. I think that there's a physical and health component to this that is really important, that you need to be able to take care of yourself physically in order to be ready to basically, take in any information mentally. So I think there's this mind-body aspect of it. But I really do like what Stoics do at the end of the day. They ask themselves 3 questions: what did they do well, what did they do poorly, and how can you become your ideal self? And I think by holding yourself accountable on a daily basis, that's a habit that actually will give you a concrete document that will allow you to look back and say, who am I really? What am I really doing? If you're being honest in that. So I think that's a very helpful habit to have. I think there's another, I think having very clear goals too, as to what you want to learn and why you want to learn it, and to really understand. And that comes back to your values. First you have to have your values, then you have your goals, and then you have principles in there. But I think that's having like it's something that's an aim that you're moving towards. So I think that these are all habits that really can help us. Just holding ourselves accountable, I think, is probably the most important.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Last is Maritza, and then I'm going to ask you about your feedback on this meetup structure. Maritza, followed by Judy. Maritza.
So I guess I might ultimately end up echoing Joe. Sorry. but I was thinking that, a goal is a must, and habits are very important, but we should not get stuck on the actual goal. So, one of my favorite things that I've done here is, I write into presentations for the flow meetups. In the very end of the first book, that's what I put. I put, creating a life goal is of the utmost importance. Goals are meaningless. Make a goal anyway. And the reason is that what I think of, so something so simple as committing to drinking 20 ounces of water when you first wake up in the morning will create a habit that puts you in a position where now you are moving forward in your day with intent, as opposed to just waking up and either you're going to go to the bathroom or you're going to go downstairs, you're going to hit the snooze button. And I find that the actual habit itself is not as important as having a habit, if that makes sense. That moving forward with intent makes all the difference in the world. And I think that that is something to increase going forward, to find ourselves greater and more efficient and proficient comprehensivists in the future.
Wonderful. Last is Judy. Judy, if you could briefly talk about what habits you found useful.
I'm not very physically inclined, so and my past habits aren't that great. So I plan to improve my physical habits.
Wonderful.
Basically with what everybody has been saying. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So now I wanted to just tell you what the format was. And it's basically 8-part format, which is trying to leverage like different capabilities that we have. So the first one is capability of concentration, kind of remaining focused. Second is the camp of asking the question, what is it? Of basically using, to use terminology of Jung, the first one is NI, of saying, this is what I'm going to focus on. I want a vision of this particular thing. The second one is TI, of saying, you're saying, what is the truth here? What is the nature of this thing? The third one is FE, where you respect other people and actually listen to what they have to offer on the topic. The fourth one is about concretizing things, of seeing things in a really clear, concrete terms. So those are the first 4, which lay the groundwork. Then you're saying, you're looking at possibilities. This is your extroverted intuition of saying, what is possible here? The next, you're trying to integrate that into the world and trying to make a plan of how you can really change things in the external world. And that is, extroverted thinking. The one after that is about looking at your values, your FI, or your introverted feeling of saying, what does this actually mean to me? What do I really value? And the last one is about building that into your habits. That is your introverted sensation or habits or memory, or kind of building it as a standard part of your life. And all these questions are focused on triggering all of these different stages, or for triggering these different ways of approaching this. So you're kind of using your entire toolkit and doing that with different people doing it, because some of them are going to be stronger at one and the others, and you're trying to learn what you can from each of them. So that is the format. How did it go? So please give me feedback about, how did the discussion go? Was it just any comments? Let's start with Joe.
Yes, I really like this because you're really pulling a problem, like comprehensivism is abstract. So you're asking these questions, these probing questions, and getting to the core of what it is and how we view it. And we're hearing what other people have to say. So then we can make that comparison and walk away with a better understanding of how everybody thinks about comprehensivism. So I like that a lot. And I would like this because you're many times as not only what it is, but how are you implementing it? Going through that process is, I think, extremely beneficial.
Wonderful. Thank you. Evanik, what did you think?
I thought it was great. I like the aspect of being interactive. I also like the practical takeaways that you get from this and listening to what other people are doing in their daily lives really gives you ideas of what you can implement in your own life. And so I thought that I love the interactiveness of it and the practicality of it.
Wonderful. Judy, followed by Mike. Judy, what did you think?
I thought it was very concise, very organized. I love the questions and how you focused on the questions and kept us on target with the questions by reviewing the ones that we had just done and for telling us the ones that were coming in the future. You at the beginning, you told us there was going to be 8 and there were 8. And you didn't steer away from anything. It was just, you kept on target, and that's what's really needed. This type of conciseness, organization, follow through, and make things happen in the time allotted that we have to. So very well organized. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mike, followed by Brian. Mike.
Yeah, I found it to be a nice contrast to some of the usual meetups. This time we were prompted. And again, it was more concise. I like that because then you saw everybody here kind of narrowed down as opposed to all of us just coming up with our own ideas. And I like them both. I really do like them both. I found it to be a nice contrast.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Brian, followed by Rupali. Brian.
So I guess to my mind, there's 2 parts to the format. The 8-point, which is brilliant. It's really a very comprehensive approach. The second is the discussion, and that just illustrates to me how discussion is really the most effective way to gain a comprehensivist perspective or a comprehensive perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Next up is Rupali, followed by Maritza. Rupali.
So I really enjoyed this format. I think having the questions to guide was helpful. We've done breakout rooms in the past and come back, but not having that, as Mike said, both formats are great, but having a conversation that moved quickly from one thing to the next, but at the same time was connected, was very helpful. I was thinking that at some point you're going to pull out your diagram, and I was waiting for it, but that didn't happen.
No, I basically converted the diagram into the discussion format.
Right.
These are all the colors in the same order that I have in the diagram.
And I kept thinking that these are the 8 things you've been mentioning, but I was hoping to see your diagram. All right. That's just...
I will email it to you. Next up is going to be Maritza.
I felt like you were asking us to take the same theme or concept and look at it from a variety of different angles or perspectives. And that's really rather enticing. It feels like it's like, a ball or a hexagon, and we're just looking at trying to find all the various facets that we can discover. And I really, really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Thank you. I mean, I thought it worked out really well. And primarily it is because such an amazing group of people. It's like if you look at just these, if you watch the video of it, you will find that actually what we've covered is well beyond what I could possibly summarize or anybody could possibly get their mind around, because it's really an amazing set of points. And I want to go and watch the video again to see what everything that was said and trying to see connections between them, because it's not just those 8 things. because it's like these 8 things and all the people. And each of the people have things on each of these axes, which are different. And you will see that there is, in some things, people are just way out there. They provide something, and there's so many new surprises. I think it gives an opportunity for people to add things. It jogs people's memories. It jogs, not just memories, but it just kind of jogs their brain to produce things along many different angles. And some things are going to produce things better for some and versus others. And as a result, I think you get something really, really good. So I'm looking forward to experimenting with this format to see what it can do. And again, honored to be, to have this opportunity of actually talking to such amazing people. So thank you very much. And we'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.